Hello, welcome to the Everything is Black and White podcast. It's transfer deadline day. I'm Andrew Musgrove, joined by Chief Sports Writer Lee Ryder. And for those watching, you can see he's outside of St James's Park. We're expecting it to be a little bit of a quiet day, but this morning there's been some big claims made on the continent about Sandro Tonali. And that's where we're going to start with Lee on the claims that Arsenal have made a late bid or are interested in doing so regarding the Italian midfielder. Lee, what is the transfer truth on this one?
Yeah, well, Newcastle have instantly dismissed that, basically saying there's no contacts whatsoever from Arsenal for Sandro Tonali. And I think the reality is that, he's been linked a lot of times with a move away from Newcastle, but he's contracted until 2029. He's got a year after that to go. He said he's happy here, but he said he can't predict the future, and no player can. So you wonder where this one really has come from. It could well have come from the sort of people around, in and around his agents, his entourage, and it's basically one that's been dismissed by Newcastle. They've got no interest in selling one of the star players, certainly not on deadline day.
Yeah, and if they did have any interest, it would certainly cost Arsenal a very pretty penny indeed. But Tonali himself, Lee, hasn't quite looked himself, has he, over the last few weeks and months? Do you think he's still happy at Newcastle? Obviously, he's signed that contract extension. And do you think this is just one of those moments a player goes through? Form is temporary, is what they say, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly one of the things that gets wheeled out when, the player is going through a bad patch. On Saturday, he didn't look comfortable at all in that game. It was a really stellar midfield battle, and he didn't really come out of it on top. I think for him, he'll be disappointed, certainly with the first goal, positioning wise, and then the second goal. It was almost like the whole defence and midfield were just standing around in the penalty area. It was a really tough night at Anfield in the end, and Sandro Tonali wasn't one of the star performers, unfortunately. But that doesn't mean that Newcastle would be interested in selling him. The reality is he's one of the players that Eddie Howe wants to build a team around. And while he hasn't been in the best of forms at the moment, you certainly think moving forward, once the window's shut and things start settling down, players come back from injury, you expect that Sandro Tonali would, be a player Newcastle will be challenging for with at the top.
Certainly so. And I guess despite the lack of form, the biggest compliment you can pay him is the fact that title challengers or the people who we expect to win the title, it looks like they're going to in Arsenal, have been linked with him and with a big money move. I mean, that tells you all you need to know about the quality of player Tonali is.
Yeah, I mean, Newcastle signed him, and there was a lot of fanfare about it for Newcastle fans. They've seen him as a star player coming in, and putting aside his issues when he got the FIFA ban for the betting, he's been a sensation on the pitch for Newcastle. I mean, even from his debut here, he scored against Aston Villa. When you remember that game, and he's never really looked back in terms of performances. It's only off the field that Newcastle have had those issues with, but that's well behind him now. The fact that people are talking about getting him a new contract or an enhanced contract, it just shows you what a success he's been here. And if Newcastle can get him for his peak years, then that's a great thing for the club.
Yeah, certainly so. Just a reminder to you guys watching and listening, this episode is sponsored by NordVPN. You can click the link in the podcast description box, get a discounted offer on your plan. No risk with a 30-day money-back guarantee. Aside from the Tonali claims, Lee, what else are we expecting today? A potential outgoing with Jamal Lascelles heading to Leicester?
Yeah, it looks like the club captain is finally going to say farewell to the Magpies after 12 years. After 12 years being a player here, obviously, if you remember, he went straight back on loan to Nottingham Forest when Newcastle signed him, and he had another year's experience at the City ground. But now is the time for him to leave the club. It's been a real roller coaster for him. He's captained the club during the Championship year. He's managed to play in the Champions League here. He's scored some big goals for the club. And he's always been a player that has never let Newcastle down, in my opinion. Even when he's had a bad game, he's put his hands up and admitted it. when Newcastle had some tough times and lost games, he was always the first player to come along the mix zone and talk. He always had a good relationship with the local press, and his presence is going to be a big one behind the scenes. He hasn't played a lot of late, but for me, when you go back to the times when Newcastle were really digging in and really needing to stay in the Premier League, he was there. And even recently, he's had been a big presence behind the scenes. He's still been a captain. He's still been there for advice to all the younger players. So, yeah, he's going to be a big miss for Newcastle United, one way or the other.
Yeah, I remember going to an event a couple of years back when Lascelles wasn't in the side, and one of the questions was, who's the best trainer on the pitch, on the training pitch, and the answer was Jamal Lascelles. He might not be playing, but he's working hard behind the scenes. He's setting the standard, setting the bar for everyone else to hit, and he has been a fantastic servant for Newcastle United, and we wish him well if indeed he does end up at the King Power. In terms of the rest of the squad, Lee, I mean, we're not expecting any big names to leave today. Obviously, Joe Willock was linked with a move to Fulham, but with Newcastle's injuries in the middle, that's going to be very unlikely. In terms of the senior players, is that it? Jamal Lascelles is probably the only one that is going to go. Do you think?
Well, I think Eddie Howe's pretty much put up a fight not to lose any players. If he can't sign players, then he certainly doesn't want to reduce the squad size. And Joe Willock fits into that category. That story broke on Saturday morning and it was instantly dismissed, not only by Newcastle, but by Fulham as well. So that tells you something. Again, I think there's a lot of sort of talk in and around the sort of agents of players trying to maybe get a last gasp move on at the end of the winter trading period. But Joe Willock, he's just come back into form, hasn't he? And really, that would be a disastrous move for Newcastle to get rid of Joe Willock, even for £20 million, if that's what the fee was. To lose him when you've got Joe Linton injured and Bruno Guimaraes injured, I don't think it would be a good shout at the minute, especially now we're going into the running, aren't we? There's 14 games left. Eddie Howe needs all those players in and around the squad, and Joe Willock is certainly one of them. So, yeah, that one was dismissed by Newcastle. It is deadline day. Anything can still happen between now and 7 p.m. But I think it would take something absolutely astronomical for any player to leave at the moment.
And in terms of a question you asked Eddie Howe not so long ago regarding the loan market, and he came back and he said, we haven't got many friends in that instance because we're kind of competitors. But we have seen Aston Villa, for example, sign a couple of players on loan. Just want to get your thoughts, because a lot of people are asking, Lee, why aren't Newcastle dipping at the market? We've heard Eddie Howe's take on it. I'd just like to get your analysis on it as well.
Well, if you remember, not that long ago, Newcastle were actually in danger of a points deduction going into I think it was June 2024 when Elliot Anderson was sold and Yakuba Minter went to Brighton as well, and they had to really raise funds and make sure that they stayed away from that points deduction. And it's pretty much something that they've got to keep an eye on, the PSR situation. I get what you're saying about Aston Villa. I don't know the ins and outs of the finances at Villa Park, but I know that Newcastle were very close to the edge a couple of years ago, and they don't want to go back there. And the reality is, for Newcastle, they had a big spend in the summer. They've always said every penny that is available, they'll plough it back onto the pitch. And that's exactly what they've done. That's what they've done last summer. They had pretty much a £200 million spend. And really, I personally think if Newcastle could have brought players in this window and splashed out, then I think they would have. And that just hasn't happened. And I think there's good reasons for that. I think Eddie Howe has been totally honest from the start. He said there is some money to spend, but the reality is other things have got to happen. And you might have some money. Let's say, for argument's sake, there was £30 million in the pot to spend. That's all well and good. But if then a player is asking for a 5-year contract and wants £150,000 a week, then that changes the dynamics at PSR again. And I think that's what Eddie Howe was hinting at. He's been honest. He said basically that they were always going to be in for a backup defender. I asked him at Wolves, would they go for an offensive player. He said, we haven't got the finances. I asked him again on Saturday night, do you think we can hang our hat on Newcastle signing a player at all? And he basically said no. So things have changed. He says it changes on a daily basis. And I think everybody trusts what Eddie Howe's saying, and you've got to stick with him on this one.
And I guess the other thing is as well, like you say, we don't know the ins and outs of the deals for Tammy Abraham or Douglas Luiz at Villa, but you would imagine they come with, or Douglas Luiz at least comes with a hefty loan fee, and that's the reality, isn't it? That you're not just borrowing a player for 6 months, even if there's no permanent deal at the end of it. You're probably shelling out the best part of maybe £7-8 million at some instances for a player for a matter of games.
Well, that's it. And the actual loan fees, sometimes they're forgotten about, isn't it? And some of the loan fees that I've seen in the last couple of windows have been as high as like 10-12 million pounds. So it's almost, you're getting the player on loan, but you're actually paying to hire the player. And then you've got the wages and then the signing on fee and the sign on fee for the agents as well. So I would say that deal is worth a lot more than is being publicised by Aston Villa at the minute. So for Newcastle, they've just got to stay in their own lane and work with what they've got. They've got Joe Willock coming back from injury now. Jacob Ramsey had a very decent game over in Paris the other night in the Champions League. So I think really for anyone looking at it, they've just basically got to trust what Eddie Howe is saying at the moment.
Final question then, Lee, before I let you get back to the day. A lot of people have said, they need a player to come in, left back, centre back, whatever it may be. It looks like that probably won't happen. If it doesn't happen, do you think they have got enough to not only get by, but hopefully get into the top 4, top 5?
Yeah, I think only just they've got enough. But if they get more injuries, then I think that is going to be a big thing. I mean, getting in the top 5, I mean, that is a different proposition, really. They're already way off the pace of that now. I think that is going to be, if we're being realistic, that's going to be a big ask to get back into the top 5. For me, this season, they're still in the FA Cup, still in the Carabao Cup as it stands, of course, and still in the Champions League. So there's still a lot to go at. There's still other prizes on offer in the Premier League, like Europa League football or Europa Conference League. Newcastle could have a good run, but if we're being honest, you look at the last 14 games, they're probably going to have to win 9 or 10 of those games, and they've won 9 games from 24. So it's going to be a tough ask, but they're more than capable of rallying. They just need to get a run together. They need to get their away form back on track, which they haven't done this season. They've only won 2 games. So yeah, it's a hard one to call, but you've got to take little things. I mean, look at Aston Villa yesterday. They lost at home. It was the second time they've lost at home in recent times. Newcastle played them in the FA Cup, so that game can't be written off in the 4th round of the Cup. Champions League can't be written off. They've got a great chance of getting through in that. And we see what happens with the Carabao Cup at Man City this week.
Yep, some big games coming up. Big thanks to Lee for popping on and providing the insight in the transfer deadline day for Newcastle United. Do get into the comments and let us know your thoughts on anything that me and Lee have discussed in this episode. Plenty of content coming your way with a busy week for Newcastle United. Do head over to chroniclelive.co.uk for all the latest Newcastle United news.